The fluorescent lights flickered above the pharmacy counter, casting a sterile glow over Elliot's trembling hands. He was drowning in the weight of his own heartbeat, each thud a reminder of the panic attack that had sent him here, to this small-town drugstore in rural Ohio. At 28, he thought he'd outrun the chaos of his past, but the ghosts of shame and secrecy always found him. Elliot clutched the crumpled prescription slip, his knuckles white. The paper was a lifeline, scrawled by a doctor who barely looked at him during the 10-minute visit. Generalized anxiety disorder. The diagnosis read, but it didn't capture the way his chest tightened at 3 a.m., or how his father's voice still echoed, calling him weak, broken, wrong. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the man behind the counter. James, the pharmacist, was 35, with steady hands and eyes that seemed to see through people, not at them. His name tag gleamed under the light, and his white coat was pristine, a stark contrast to Elliot's faded denim jacket. "You okay?" James asked, his voice low, almost too kind for a stranger. Elliot nodded, but his throat was dry. Words stuck like gravel. "It's just been a rough week," Elliot managed, sliding the prescription across the counter. James glanced at it, then back at him, his gaze lingering a moment too long. There was something in that look: curiosity, maybe, or recognition. Elliot's stomach twisted, not unpleasantly. James turned to the shelves, his movements deliberate, like he was solving a puzzle. "Xanax. 0.5 milligrams, he said, reading the script. "This'll help with the anxiety, but it's strong. You'll want to be careful." He paused, holding the bottle, his fingers brushing Elliot's as he handed it over. The touch was fleeting, electric, and Elliot's breath caught. "Thanks," Elliot mumbled, shoving the bottle into his pocket. He wanted to say more, to ask why James's voice felt like a tether pulling him back from the edge. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to leave, the bell above the door jingling as he stepped into the chilly evening. Outside, the town of Willow Creek was quiet, its main street lined with brick storefronts and fading autumn leaves. Elliot leaned against the pharmacy's exterior, the bottle heavy in his pocket. He didn't need the pills, yet not when the memory of James's steady gaze was enough to slow his racing heart. He hadn't felt this kind of pull in years, not since he'd buried his truth under layers of denial to survive his family's judgment. Back inside, James watched the door swing shut, his fingers still tingling from that accidental touch. He'd seen plenty of customers in distress, but something about Elliot, his guarded eyes, the way he carried himself like he was bracing for a blow, stuck with him. James had his own secrets. Once he'd learned to keep quiet in a town where whispers traveled faster than truth. He shook his head, trying to focus on the next prescription, but Elliot's face lingered in his mind. Elliot didn't take the pills that night. He sat on his couch, the bottle unopened on the coffee table, staring at it like it held answers he wasn't ready to hear. His apartment was a mess of unpacked boxes, a testament to his restless moves from city to city, chasing stability he never found. Willow Creek was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to blend in, to be invisible. But James's kindness had cracked something open, something dangerous and alive. The next day, Elliot found himself back at the pharmacy, not because he needed a refill, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left something behind. The bell jingled again, and there was James, looking up from a stack of paperwork. "Back so soon," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I had a question about the meds." Elliot lied, his face flushing. He hadn't planned this, hadn't meant to stand here feeling like a teenager with a crush. But James didn't call him out. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the counter, and listened as Elliot stammered through a half-baked question about side effects. They can make you drowsy, James said, his tone patient. But if you're feeling off, you can call me. Here. He scribbled his number on a scrap of paper and slid it across the counter. In case you need to talk. About the meds. Or anything. Elliot stared at the paper, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about pills anymore. He took the number, his fingers brushing James's again. And this time, neither of them pulled away so quickly. That scrap of paper burned a hole in Elliot's pocket for 3 days. He'd unfold it, stare at the neat handwriting James's number, followed by a simple call me, and then shove it back, convinced he was reading too much into it. But the memory of James's steady gaze, the way his voice softened when he spoke, kept pulling Elliot back to the pharmacy. Willow Creek was small, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. Elliot had moved here to escape the noise of Cleveland, where his family's disapproval had suffocated him. His father's words still stung. You're not one of those people, Elliot. You're better than that. He'd spent years trying to prove he was normal, dating women he didn't love, hiding who he was. But now, at 28, he was tired of pretending. On the 4th day, he called. His hands shook as he dialed, pacing his cramped apartment. James answered on the 2nd ring, his voice warm and familiar. Elliot, everything okay with the meds? Yeah, they're fine, Elliot said. Too quickly. I just wanted to talk. You said I could, right? James chuckled, a sound that eased the knot in Elliot's chest. I did. You free tonight? There's a diner down the street. Nothing fancy, but they've got good coffee. Elliot hesitated, his mind racing with excuses to back out. But something in James's tone, genuine, unguarded, made him say, Sure. 7. The diner was a relic, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. James was already there when Elliot arrived, sitting in a corner booth, his white coat traded for a navy sweater. He looked younger, less like the polished pharmacist and more like someone Elliot could imagine sharing a life with. The thought startled him. You look like you're carrying the world, James said as Elliot slid into the booth. Want to tell me about it? Elliot laughed, a nervous sound. That obvious? Huh. He fiddled with the sugar packets, avoiding James's eyes. It's just life. You know how it is. James leaned forward, his expression serious. I know more than you think. Small towns aren't always kind to people who don't fit the mold. Elliot's breath hitched. Was James hinting at something? Or was he projecting? He wanted to ask, to spill everything, his fears, his past, the way he felt alive for the first time in years just sitting across from this man. But the words stayed locked inside. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. James shared stories of growing up in Willow Creek, of wanting to leave but staying to care for his aging mother. Elliot admitted he'd moved here on a whim, chasing a job at the local hardware store that barely paid the bills. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an undercurrent, a spark that neither acknowledged but both felt. As they left the diner, the night air was crisp, the stars bright above the quiet town. James walked Elliot to his car, their shoulders brushing. I'm glad you called, James said, his voice low. I wasn't sure you would. Elliot's heart raced. I wasn't sure I would either. He paused, then took a risk. Can I see you again? Not just at the pharmacy. James's smile was slow, deliberate. Yeah, I'd like that. The next week was a blur of stolen moments. They met for coffee, then lunch, then a walk by the river that cut through Willow Creek. Each time, Elliot felt the walls he'd built around himself crumbling. James was patient, never pushing, but his presence was a constant invitation to be honest, to be himself. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the water, James turned to him. "Elliot, what are you afraid of? I see it in you. Every time we talk. Like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to tell James everything about his father's rejection, the years of hiding, the fear that letting someone in would only lead to pain. But instead, he reached for James's hand, his fingers trembling as they intertwined. "I'm afraid of this," he whispered. "Of wanting this." James didn't pull away. Instead, he squeezed Elliot's hand, his eyes steady. "You don't have to be afraid alone." That night, Elliot didn't sleep. He lay awake, replaying the moment, the warmth of James's hand in his. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a disappointment or a secret, but as himself. And it terrified him. The days that followed were a tightrope walk between hope and fear. Elliot woke each morning with James on his mind. The memory of their hands entwined like a drug he couldn't quit. But Willow Creek's small-town eyes were everywhere, and Elliot felt them watching, judging, waiting for him to slip. He started noticing the glances at the hardware store where he worked. A coworker, Mike, made a snide comment about city boys and their fancy ways. It was vague, but it hit Elliot like a punch, reminding him of the whispers he'd heard growing up. He'd learned to shrink himself, to avoid drawing attention. But James made that impossible. Every smile, every touch, felt like a spotlight. James, too, was navigating his own tightrope. At 35, he'd built a life in Willow Creek, a reputation as the dependable pharmacist who always had a kind word. But he'd never been fully honest with the towner himself. He'd dated women, played the part, because it was easier than facing the truth in a place where different was a dirty word. Meeting Elliot had changed that. For the first time, James wanted to stop hiding. One afternoon, Elliot stopped by the pharmacy. His excuse a bottle of aspirin he didn't need. The store was quiet. The only sound the hum of the air conditioner. James leaned over the counter, his voice low. "You're going to run out of excuses to come here. You know." Elliot grinned, his nerves easing. "Maybe I just like the service." James laughed, but his eyes were serious. "Meet me tonight. My place. I'll cook." Elliot's stomach flipped. This was new territory, a step beyond coffee and river walks. "You sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," James said, his gaze unwavering. "Unless you're not." Elliot wasn't sure not of James, but of himself. But he nodded, the word, "okay," slipping out before he could overthink it. That evening, James's house was a small, tidy bungalow on the edge of town, with a porch swing and a garden that smelled of lavender. Inside, the kitchen was warm, filled with the aroma of garlic and rosemary. James moved with ease, chopping vegetables, stirring a pot of pasta, while Elliot sat at the counter, feeling out of place but oddly at home. "You're good at this," Elliot said, watching James's hands steady, precise, the same hands that had handed him that first prescription. "Years of practice," James replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Mom taught me. Said cooking's the best way to show you care." Elliot's chest ached at the words. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cared enough to cook for him. His family had stopped inviting him to dinners after he came out at 20, their silence louder than any argument. He pushed the memory away, focusing on James, on the way he hummed softly as he worked. Dinner was simple but perfect: pasta with homemade sauce, a glass of wine, and conversation that flowed like they'd known each other for years. After, They moved to the couch, the space between them shrinking until Elliot's knee brushed James's. Neither moved away. "Elliot," James said, his voice soft but firm. "I need to know what this is for you. Because for me, it's real." Elliot's heart pounded. He wanted to say it was real for him too, that James was the first person who made him feel like he could breathe. But fear clawed at him, whispering that this couldn't last, that Willow Creek would never let it. "It's real," he said finally, his voice breaking. "But I'm scared. James. I've lost too much before." James reached for his hand, his touch grounding. "I'm scared too. But I'm not going anywhere." They kissed then, tentative at first, then deeper, like they were making up for lost time. It was more than attraction, it was a promise. A defiance against the world that told them they couldn't have this. Elliot's fears didn't vanish. But for that moment, they were quiet, drowned out by the warmth of James's lips, the weight of his hand on Elliot's cheek. When Elliot left that night, the stars were brighter, the air lighter. But as he drove back to his apartment, a car slowed beside him, its driver staring a little too long. Elliot's stomach twisted. Willow Creek was watching, and he wasn't sure how long he and James could keep this secret. The secret grew heavier with each passing day. Elliot and James stole moments when they cootled late-night talks at James's house. Quick glances at the pharmacy, a brush of hands in the diner's back booth. But Willow Creek's smallness meant nowhere was truly safe. Every time Elliot left James's house, he checked his rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following. At the hardware store, the whispers grew louder. Mike, the coworker who'd made the city boy jab, started watching Elliot too closely, his smirks laced with something mean. One day, as Elliot stocked shelves, Mike leaned in, his voice low. "You and that pharmacist seem real friendly. People are starting to talk." Elliot's blood ran cold. "We're just friends," he said, his tone flat. But his hands shook as he stacked paint cans. Mike snorted. "Sure. Just watch yourself. This town don't take kindly to certain types." The words hit like a slap, dragging Elliot back to his father's living room, to the night he'd come out and been told to leave. He wanted to tell Mike to go to hell, but fear kept him silent. He couldn't lose this job, this town, this fragile thing with James. Not yet. That night, at James's house, Elliot told him about Mike's comment. They were on the porch swing, the creak of the chains the only sound in the quiet night. James's face hardened, his jaw tight. "People like Mike thrive on making others feel small," he said. "But they don't get to decide who we are." Elliot wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at him. What if they find out? James, this town, they'll tear us apart. James took his hand, his grip firm. "Let them try. I've spent too long hiding. I'm done with that." Elliot looked at him, at the fire in his eyes, and felt a flicker of courage. But it was fleeting. The next day, a customer at the Pharmacist, older woman with sharp eyes, lingered at the counter, watching James and Elliot talk. "You're new in town, aren't you?" she asked Elliot, her tone probing. "Hope you're settling in okay. Willow Creek's particular about its people." Elliot mumbled a response, his skin prickling. When she left, James leaned over the counter, his voice low. "Don't let her get to you. She's just fishing." But Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that the town was closing in. He started avoiding Main Street, taking back roads to James's house. He stopped going to the diner, afraid of who might be watching. James noticed, his worry growing with each canceled plan. "You're pulling away," he said one night, his voice heavy. "Is it me?" "No," Elliot said quickly, his chest tight. "It's not you. It's this place. It's me. I don't know how to do this without losing everything. James reached for him, pulling him close. You're not losing me. We'll figure this out. Together. But together felt fragile when the world seemed so ready to tear them apart. The breaking point came a week later, at the town's annual harvest festival. Elliot hadn't wanted to go, but James convinced him, saying they could blend in. Just two guys hanging out. The festival was crowded, the air thick with the smell of fried dough and cider. Lights strung across the square glowed against the dusk, and a band played old country tunes. They stayed on the edges, laughing over shared cotton candy. But Elliot couldn't relax. He saw Mike across the square, talking to a group of men, their eyes flicking toward him and James. When one of them pointed, Elliot's heart sank. We should go, he whispered. James followed his gaze, his expression darkening. They don't know anything. They're just guessing. But as they left, a voice called out Mike's. Hey, Pharmacist. You and your buddy got something to share with the rest of us. The crowd went quiet, heads turning. Elliot froze, his pulse roaring in his ears. James stepped forward, his voice steady. Mind your own business, Mike. Mike laughed, loud and cruel. Oh, we're all real curious, ain't we? Elliot wanted to disappear, to run. But James grabbed his hand, holding tight. Let's go, he said, pulling Elliot away. The crowd parted, their stares heavy, and Elliot felt every one like a blade. Back at James's house, Elliot collapsed onto the couch, his hands shaking. This is what I was afraid of, he said, his voice breaking. They'll ruin us. James knelt in front of him, his eyes fierce. They don't get to win. Not unless we let them. But as Elliot looked at him, he wondered if courage was enough to survive a town that hated who they were. The fallout from the festival spread like wildfire. By Monday, the pharmacy was buzzing with whispers, customers casting sidelong glances at James as he filled prescriptions. Elliot stayed away, too shaken to face the counter. But the distance only made him feel more alone. He missed James's voice, his touch, the way he made the world feel less heavy. James called that night, his tone strained. People are talking. Elliot, I heard it all day. Snide comments. Questions about you. I shut it down. But it's not stopping. Elliot's stomach churned. What do we do? Just pretend it didn't happen. No, James said firmly. We don't pretend. But we need to be smart. Lay low for a bit. Let it blow over. Elliot agreed. But laying low felt like hiding. And hiding felt like betrayal. He hated how familiar it was. How it dragged him back to the years he'd spent lying to his family. To himself. He wanted to be brave. Like James. But bravery felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. A week later, the tension boiled over. Elliot was at the hardware store, ringing up a customer, when Mike cornered him in the break room. You think you can just waltz into our town and do whatever you want? He spat, his face inches from Elliot's. People like you don't belong here. Elliot's fists clenched, but he didn't swing. Back off, Mike, he said, his voice low but steady. Mike smirked, leaning closer. Or what? You gonna cry to your boyfriend? The word hit like a bullet. But before Elliot could respond, the store manager walked in, breaking the moment. Mike backed off, but his threat lingered in the air. That night, Elliot told James everything, his voice shaking as he recounted the confrontation. James's face was a storm of anger and worry. He's a coward, he said, pacing his living room. But he's dangerous. We need to be careful. Careful, Elliot snapped. his frustration spilling over. I'm tired of being careful. James. I'm tired of feeling like I have to hide who I am. But I'm also terrified of what happens if I don't. James stopped pacing, his eyes softening. I know. I'm scared too. But running from this from us won't make it better. Elliot wanted to believe him. But fear was a powerful thing. He started pulling back, canceling plans, avoiding the pharmacy. James tried to reach him, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. Talk to me, Elliot. One message pleaded. Don't shut me out. But Elliot was spiraling, caught between his love for James and the weight of a town that felt like it was closing in. One night, unable to sleep, he drove to the river, the place where he and James had shared their first real moment. He sat on the bench, staring at the water, and let himself cry. He cried for the boy he'd been, who'd lost his family for being honest. He cried for the man he was now, too afraid to hold on to the one person who made him feel whole. The next morning, he went to the pharmacy, determined to face James. But when he got there, the store was closed. A sign on the door reading, "Out of town." Panic gripped him. Had James left? Had he pushed him away for good? He called James's number, his heart pounding. When James answered, his voice was tired but warm. Elliot, I'm at my mom's in Dayton. She had a fall. I'll be back tomorrow. Relief flooded Elliot, followed by guilt. I'm sorry I've been distant, he said. I just don't know how to do this. I know, James said softly. But we can't do it alone. Come to Dayton. Meet me. We'll figure it out. Elliot hesitated, then nodded, even though James couldn't see. Okay, I'll come. The drive to Dayton was 2 hours, each mile a battle between hope and fear. When he arrived at the hospital, James was in the waiting room, his face drawn but lighting up when he saw Elliot. They hugged, a fierce, desperate embrace that said everything they hadn't. I'm not giving up on us, James whispered. Not for Willow Creek. Not for anyone. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. Neither am I. But as they stood there, holding each other, Elliot knew the hardest part was still ahead. Willow Creek wasn't done with them, and neither was the world. Dayton was a temporary escape, a bubble where Elliot and James could breathe. They spent the day at the hospital, sitting with James's mother, who was frail but sharp, her eyes crinkling with warmth when she met Elliot. You're good for him, she whispered when James stepped out, her words catching Elliot off guard. He wanted to believe her, but Willow Creek loomed in his mind, a shadow he couldn't shake. When they returned to town, the air felt heavier. The pharmacy reopened, but customers were colder, their smiles forced. James brushed it off, but Elliot saw the strain in his eyes. At the hardware store, Mike's taunts escalated, his comments laced with venom. Heard you took a little trip, he sneered one day. What? You and the pharmacist eloping or something? Elliot ignored him, but the words festered. He started noticing graffiti on the pharmacy's back wall, crude words, hateful slurs. James scrubbed it off without a word, but his silence scared Elliot more than anger would have. Talk to me, Elliot said one night, sitting on James's couch. Don't shut me out. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying to keep it together. Elliot, this town, it's my home, but it's turning on me. On us. Elliot's heart sank. Do you regret this? Us? No, James said fiercely, grabbing his hand. Never. But I don't know how to fight this without losing everything I've built. The next blow came unexpectedly. A local church group, led by a pastor known for his fire and brimstone sermons, started a petition to protect Willow Creek's values. It didn't name James or Elliot, but the implications were clear. Flyers appeared around town, tucked under windshield wipers, pinned to bulletin boards. "Keep our town pure," they read, with vague references to outsiders and sinful lifestyles. Elliot found one on his car, the words blurring as his hands shook. He drove to James's house. The flyer crumpled in his fist. "They're coming for us," he said, his voice raw. "This isn't going to stop." James read the flyer, his face pale. "This is Pastor Reynolds. He's been looking for a cause to rally behind. We're just his latest target." "What do we do?" Elliot asked, his voice breaking. "Leave. Fight. I don't even know what fighting looks like." James pulled him close, his arms steady despite the storm in his eyes. "We don't run, but we don't play their game either. We live our truth. Elliot, that's how we fight." The next day, James made a decision. He put up a sign in the pharmacy window, "All are welcome here." It was simple, but in Willow Creek, it was a declaration. Customers stopped coming, some outright refusing to be served by that kind of man. But others, quiet allies, people who'd known James for years, started showing up. Their support small but fierce. Elliot, inspired by James's courage, took a risk of his own. He went to the hardware store and told his manager about Mike's harassment. To his surprise, the manager listened, his face grim. "Mike's been a problem for a while," he said. "I'll handle it." Mike was suspended the next day, his absence a small victory. But the town's anger didn't fade. At a town hall meeting, Pastor Reynolds stood at the podium, his voice booming about protecting family values. Elliot and James sat in the back, holding hands under the table, their presence a quiet rebellion. When a woman stood up, a regular at the pharmacy, and spoke in their defense, "James has been nothing but kind to this town. Leave him be." Elliot felt a spark of hope. Others nodded. Some even clapped. But the room was still divided, the air thick with tension. As they left the meeting, a teenager approached them, his eyes nervous but determined. "I just wanted to say, thank you for being you." He glanced around, then hurried away, but his words lingered. That night, Elliot and James sat on the porch swing, the stars above them a reminder of something bigger than Willow Creek. "We're not alone," James said, his voice soft. "Not anymore." Elliot nodded, his hand in James's. For the first time, he believed they could face this together. The fight wasn't over, but it was changing. Willow Creek was split. Some rallied behind Pastor Reynolds, their voices loud and hateful, while others quietly supported James and Elliot, their kindness a lifeline. The pharmacy's business slowed, but James kept the "All are welcome" sign up, a beacon in the storm. Elliot found strength he didn't know he had. He started talking back at work, refusing to let snide comments slide. When a customer at the hardware store muttered something about people like him, Elliot looked him in the eye and said, "People like me are just trying to live. Same as you." The man walked away, silent, and Elliot felt a weight lift. But the pressure was relentless. One night, someone threw a brick through the pharmacy's window, the glass shattering across the floor. The word "freak" was scrawled on it in red paint. James cleaned it up before opening the next day, his face stoic. But Elliot saw the pain in his eyes. "We can't keep doing this," Elliot said, helping sweep the glass. "It's not just about us anymore. It's your business, your life here." James stopped, his hands gripping the broom. "This is my home, Elliot. I've spent my life building this. I won't let them take it." "But what if they do?" Elliot's voice cracked. "What if we lose everything?" James turned to him, his eyes fierce. "Then we start over. Together." but I'm not giving up without a fight. That fight took shape in unexpected ways. A local reporter, a young woman named Sarah who'd grown up with James, wrote an article about the pharmacy, calling it a pillar of the community. She didn't mention the brick or the petition, but her words were clear. James was one of their own, and he deserved better. The article spread, shared on social media, and soon, people from neighboring towns started coming to the pharmacy, their support a quiet rebellion against Willow Creek's hate. Elliot, too, found allies. His manager at the hardware store, moved by Elliot's honesty, started shutting down gossip in the break room. A coworker, a quiet woman named Linda, brought Elliot coffee one morning and said, "Don't let them scare you off. You're stronger than they think." The turning point came when James's mother, now recovered, came to town. She walked into the pharmacy, her cane tapping the floor, and hugged James in front of everyone. Then she turned to Elliot, her eyes warm. "You take care of my boy," she said, loud enough for the customers to hear. "He's lucky to have you." The moment was small but seismic. People saw it, talked about it. The narrative was shifting, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Pastor Reynolds's petition lost steam. His followers quieter now. The town wasn't theirs. Anna Marie, it was changing, forced to confront its own heart. One evening, Elliot and James sat by the river, the place where it all began. The water was calm, reflecting the stars. "I thought I'd lose you," Elliot admitted, his voice soft. "I thought I'd lose myself." James took his hand, his touch steady. "You're stronger than you know, Elliot. We both are." They kissed under the stars, unafraid, their love a quiet victory. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they were carving out a space to exist, to love, to be. As they walked back to James's house, hand in hand, Elliot felt something new: hope. Not just for them, but for the future. They were rewriting the rules, one step at a time. A year later, Willow Creek wasn't the same town. The pharmacy was thriving again, its "all are welcome" sign a permanent fixture. James had started a support group for local LGBTQ youth, a safe space where kids like the teenager who'd thank them could find community. Elliot volunteered, sharing his story, his voice steadier each time he spoke. They didn't hide anymore. They walked down Main Street hand in hand, ate at the diner, lived openly. Some still stared, some still whispered, but the hate had lost its edge, dulled by time and the town's slow shift. Pastor Reynolds had moved on to a new cause, his influence waning. Mike left town, his suspension turning into a quiet exit. Elliot's family was still a wound, but it was healing. He wrote his father a letter, not expecting a reply, but needing to say the words, "I'm happy. I'm loved. I'm me." To his surprise, his sister called a month later, her voice tentative but kind. "I miss you," she said, and Elliot cried, not from pain, but from the possibility of rebuilding. James's mother became their biggest cheerleader, inviting them to family dinners, her table a place of warmth and acceptance. She baked Elliot's favorite pie, blueberry, and teased James about his terrible gardening skills. It was ordinary, beautiful, everything Elliot had never thought he could have. One spring evening, they stood on James's porch, the air sweet with blooming lavender. James turned to Elliot, his eyes bright. "I want to marry you," he said. No ring, no grand gesture, just the truth. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, when you're ready. Elliot's heart swelled, the fear that once held him back now a distant memory. "I'm ready," he said, pulling James close. "For all of it." They kissed, the world quiet around them. And Elliot knew this was what he'd been craving, not just James, but the courage to live fully, openly, without shame. The pharmacist had given him something stronger than medicine: love, hope, a life worth fighting for. As they stood there, wrapped in each other, Willow Creek stretched out before them. No longer a cage, but a home they'd claimed. They'd faced the worst: hate, fear, rejection, and come out stronger. Their love wasn't just a spark anymore. It was a fire, burning bright, unapologetic, eternal. And Elliot hadn't stopped craving it since.